The phone hasn't had signal in 4 years. I charge it from the truck. There's a procedure for this, same as everything else now. Run the engine for 40 minutes, transfer the charge through the USB line I found in an O'Reilly Auto Parts in Flagstaff. About 14 months in, don't let the battery drop below 12%, because at 11, it starts threatening the save data, and the save data is the only official record I have of what happened in the order it happened. I've read the alerts on that phone 300 times, maybe more. I stopped counting somewhere in the second year. I read them again tonight because that's what I do when I can't sleep, which is most nights. I park on the shoulder of whatever road I'm on. Tonight it's a county road in eastern Colorado, the kind that doesn't have a number anymore because the sign blew down 2 winters ago and nobody put it back. And I read the alerts in the order they came in, starting with the first one. The one that woke me out of a half-doze somewhere west of Elko, Nevada at 3:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in July. I read them like testimony, like if I read them enough times in the right order, they'll tell me something they haven't told me yet. They haven't yet. My name is Hector Vega, 39 years old, though I stopped counting my age sometime in the second year the same way I stopped counting everything that didn't have operational value. From El Paso originally, which means from a family that came from somewhere else first and made El Paso the somewhere that finally stuck. My mother made tamales for Christmas. Past tense. I don't do the things some people do where you avoid past tense because using it makes the absence concrete. I use past tense because my mother made tamales for Christmas, and that is a fact about the world as it was, and the world as it was deserves to be described accurately. I've been driving for 22 years. I was good at it in the way that people who are genuinely suited to something are good at it. Not by effort, not by study, but by a fit between the person and the work that other people can see, even when the person can't. I knew I-80 the way I knew my own hands, not by studying it, but by moving through it enough times that the knowledge stopped being knowledge and became body. Mile markers, fuel stops, the grade changes outside Laramie, what the Nevada salt flats look like at 4 in the morning, the way the road felt different in each state, even when it looked the same. I carried all of it without having to think about it, which left my mind free for other things. I was carrying medical equipment on July 14th. A pallet of patient monitoring systems, 12 units, crated, manifested for Reno Regional Medical Center in Reno, Nevada. I was supposed to have delivered at 1 in the morning. I didn't because the window had closed. I don't talk about the window, not yet, not tonight. The window is a fact about the world as it was, and I'll get to it in order, the way I get to everything. What I talk about into a voice recorder I found in an office supply store in Pueblo, Colorado about 8 months ago, because talking keeps me present in a way that just moving doesn't always manage anymore, is the phone. The alerts, what they said and what they actually meant, and the gap between those two things, which was wide enough to drive a loaded semi through and is in fact the space where I've been living ever since. I say into the recorder I'm going to start at the beginning. Then I start. This is an emergency alert system message issued by the Nevada Division of Emergency Management in coordination with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Unusual atmospheric conditions have been detected in the western Nevada region. Residents of Washoe, Story, and Lyon counties are advised to shelter in place until further notice. Avoid outdoor activity. This message will repeat. I was west of Elko on I-80 when the alert tone hit the radio. I'd had the radio on low. I usually did on night runs, not for company exactly, more for the sound of a world still transmitting at 3 in the morning. Overnight radio was its own ecosystem, country stations, talk shows where callers had stopped calling because they were lonely and now called because calling was what they did, trucking dispatch channels, the occasional ghost frequency that only appeared after midnight and was gone before dawn. I've been moving through it for 2 decades. The EAS tone does something to the brain before the conscious mind has time to process it. 2 tones, descending, then the digital stutter before the voice. Every driver knows it. I pulled to the shoulder out of habit, not because there was a rule that said to, but because my father had told me once, in the context of something else entirely. When official things are being said, you stop what you're doing and you listen. I'd applied this to EAS alerts for 22 years without making a conscious decision to. I listened. I read the alert on my phone when it came through 30 seconds after the broadcast. Unusual atmospheric conditions. I translated this the way I translated everything that came to me in official English. Not word for word, but meaning to meaning. The way you render something when the original has been engineered to say as little as possible. I've been doing this my whole life, with documents written for a different kind of American, and handed to me anyway. Unusual atmospheric conditions meant something in the air they don't have a word for yet, or that they have a word for and have decided not to use. Washoe County was Reno. Leon and Story were east of Reno. I was approximately 300 miles from that cluster, moving away from it. I'd come from Sacramento, was heading towards Salt Lake City to pick up my next load after the Reno delivery that hadn't happened. The window had closed at 10:47 at night. I noted this the way I noted fuel gauge readings and road conditions. It was information. It had implications. The implications could wait. I pulled back onto I-80 and drove. The sky to the west was the dark of Nevada desert at 4 in the morning. Not black, more a deep blue-gray you could almost see into if you looked the right way. No other vehicles. I'd been alone on the road since around 2, which wasn't normal. The stretch was never exactly busy at night, but it was never exactly empty either. Trucks mostly, but also the occasional civilian insomniac, the late-night interstate driver who had their own relationship with highway darkness. Tonight, there was nothing. I drove. This is an emergency alert system message. The Federal Emergency Management Agency reports a possible contamination event in the greater Reno-Sparks metropolitan area. Residents are advised to evacuate immediately. Reno city limits, Sparks city limits, Washoe Valley. Evacuation routes: Interstate 80 East, U.S. Highway 395 South. The following facilities should be avoided: Reno Regional Medical Center, St. Mary's Regional Medical Center, VA Sierra Nevada Healthcare System. All medical facilities in the affected area should be avoided. Seek elevated ground if possible. I read this one 3 times. Renowned Regional Medical Center. That was my delivery. The pallet of monitoring systems sitting in my trailer right now, manifested, scheduled, should have been in Renown's receiving bay at 1 in the morning. I'd have been unloading when whatever this was started. I'd have been at the loading dock or in the parking structure waiting for the receiving team, standing still in a fixed location inside the perimeter they were now telling people to evacuate. I ran the arithmetic quickly. The window had closed at 10:47. I was 300 miles from a hospital I was now being told to avoid. That was the arithmetic. I put it aside to run again later, once I had more to run it against. I tried dispatch. No answer. Overnight dispatch didn't pick up unless you had a routing emergency, and I wasn't sure this qualified yet as their kind of problem. I tried, Elena. Ex-wife technically, separated 14 months, still in the contacts as Elena home because I'd never changed it. 4 rings, voicemail. I didn't leave a message because I didn't know what message to leave. I tried my mother in El Paso. It rang. I told myself she was asleep. She slept hard and always had, and a ringing phone at 5 in the morning was not enough to wake her. I drove. Seek elevated ground if possible. I translated. They think it might be in the water, or they think it acts like something in the water, and they're defaulting to flood protocol yet, because they don't have another protocol yet. I'd been breathing Nevada air for 6 hours since Sacramento. I felt fine. The road was still empty in both directions. Emergency alert. A biological hazard advisory is now in effect for the following Nevada counties: Washoe, Story, Lyon, Douglas, Carson City, Mineral, Churchill, Pershing, Elko. Citizens are advised to seek enclosed shelter immediately and remain sheltered until further notice. Do not leave shelter for any reason. Seal windows and doors if possible. This advisory may expand. Do not leave shelter. I was pulling into a rest area outside Wells, Nevada, when this alert came through. I needed to use the bathroom. I needed to stretch. I'd been in the cab for 6 hours, and I was past the point where my back would accept the seat without complaint. I pulled in, parked, got out, used the facilities, was back in the cab and moving in under 4 minutes. I didn't make a decision to be back in under 4 minutes. I was just efficient. Biological hazard. I translated something that gets into a body. Airborne or waterborne or contact. They hadn't specified. Seal windows and doors meant they thought it was airborne. I'd been stopping every couple of hours since Sacramento, getting out briefly at fuel stops, breathing whatever air was outside the truck. I'd been in Elko County on the advisory list since before the first alert. I felt fine. The rest area had 3 vehicles in the lot: a minivan, an older sedan, a pickup with Texas plates. I noticed the sedan as I walked back to the truck. The driver's door was open. Engine still running. I could hear it from 20 feet. No one visible inside. I looked at it for a moment. I didn't approach it. I didn't touch anything. I got in my truck and drove. I thought about the word abandoned. It implied departure, choice. Someone had been there and left, made a decision to go elsewhere. The sedan didn't feel like departure. It felt like interruption, like whatever had been happening in that car had simply stopped. Mid-action, the door open, because the person opening it hadn't finished opening it. I kept it with the other things that didn't add up yet and drove east. The sky was fully light now. July morning in Nevada, a light that has no softness to it, direct and flat, making everything equally visible and nothing more significant than anything else. The road behind me was straight. The road ahead was straight. The desert on both sides was the beige gray of high desert in summer, sagebrush low and consistent, mountains in the distance that stayed the same distance for a long time before finally getting closer. I'd seen this landscape 100 times. It looked the same. That was the first thing that didn't fit. It went in the same place as the sedan, the part of my mind that kept running numbers until they added up. I passed a gas station outside Pequot. Lights on, pumps lit, the price sign still showing yesterday's regular. I pulled in. I needed fuel. I had enough to make Utah, but I'd learned early in my career not to pass fuel when I didn't know when the next one would be. I was in and out in 4 minutes. I did not go inside. Through the window, I could see the store was lit, could see the aisles and the counter, could see something at the counter that I didn't look at directly. I drove. I reached Wendover, the Nevada-Utah border town, the state boundary running right through the middle of the casino strip. I slowed driving through. I didn't stop. A diner on the east edge of town, lights on. Highway diner, the old kind with counter stools and booths along the window. I slowed further and looked through the glass as I passed. The booths were occupied, all of them, counter full. A server mid-step between the counter and a far booth, coffee pot in hand, body in the exact position of someone about to take one more step. Nobody was moving. I was clear on this distinction. I'd spend time on it later. Not frozen, not collapsed, not visibly distressed, just still. The way people are still in a photograph, which is not the way people are still in life. People in life are always making micro adjustments, the constant small motion of being alive in a body. These people were still the way objects are still, the coffee pot at the exact angle of being poured, the booth customer looking toward the door. I drove past without stopping. A dog came out from between two buildings at the far end of town, running, not panicked, purposeful, the controlled run of an animal going somewhere it knew about. Large dog, a shepherd mix by the look of it, collar visible, moving southeast, out into the open land beyond the last parking lot. I watched it until the truck's movement took it out of my sightline. I noted the dog was moving. I drove into Utah. Emergency alert. Federal Emergency Management Agency. All Nevada and western Utah residents remain in place. Do not attempt to travel by vehicle or on foot. Moving through affected areas may pose significant risk. Emergency services are responding. Remain sheltered. Do not open doors or windows. All residents remain in place. I read this and looked up at the road ahead of me. Bonneville Salt Flats, the blinding white of the flats at 9 in the morning, flat enough that the earth felt like it had run out of ideas for what to do with its surface. I'd driven through here in every season. Today the salt was white and the sky was blue and everything looked exactly like itself. That was the thing. Everything looked exactly like itself. Moving through affected areas may pose significant risk. I thought about the rest area, the diner, the gas station. I thought about what I'd seen through the gas station window that I hadn't let myself look at directly. I thought, I've been in the affected area since before the first alert. I've stopped 8 times. I've been outside the truck for under 30 minutes total, in increments of under 5 minutes each time. I feel fine. I tried the radio, found the EAS loop on most stations, the same message cycling, the same flat official voice. I scanned until I found something different, a young man's voice, somewhere in Utah, alone in a studio, reading from a screen in a voice that was working very hard to stay professional and not quite managing it. He said there were reports of the event spreading. He said there were unconfirmed reports from the East Coast. He said he was going to keep broadcasting as long as he could. He broadcast for 22 more minutes. Then mid-sentence, the transmission cut. I scanned for another human voice, found the EAS loop, turned the radio off and drove in silence. I drove through the Wasatch Range, the mountains that come up fast on the Utah side, demanding the attention a loaded semi requires on grades and curves, using the part of my brain that had been running numbers all morning and giving it something practical to do for a while. I came down the west slope into the Salt Lake Valley, and the city was there, organized and lit in the late morning sun. I'd been through Salt Lake 100 times. I knew its geography. The lake to the west, the mountains east, the temple you could use as a landmark from 20 miles out. Today, the temple was lit. The streets were empty. I took surface streets because the interchange was blocked. 3 vehicles stopped across it, doors open, engines off, positioned less like an accident and more like they'd all simply stopped at the same moment. I went around. I did not stop. I drove east on I-80 toward Wyoming. Federal Emergency Management Agency, National Emergency Broadcast. Biological event now affecting all Nevada counties, all Utah counties, portions of California, Oregon, Idaho, and Arizona. The Department of Defense is coordinating response with FEMA and the CDC. All citizens, shelter in place. Do not travel. Causative agent currently under investigation. Repeat, causative agent unknown. Shelter in place. Do not travel. Causative agent unknown. I was east of Tolly when this one came through. I read it twice and landed on the same word both times. Unknown. They were telling everyone to stay still, and they didn't know what they were telling them to stay still because of. They had a protocol, shelter in place, and they were running the protocol without knowing if the protocol fit the situation. I kept driving. I entered the Wasatch Range east of Salt Lake, the grades and curves that a loaded semi can't coast through, that take whatever's left of your attention and use all of it. I drove them the way I always drove them, carefully, in control, reading the road ahead and behind simultaneously. I came down the other side and I-80 flattened east toward Wyoming. The afternoon light was long and direct on the Wyoming side. I drove through Evanston, through the first flat stretch of Wyoming grassland, watching the road and what was beside it. 3 vehicles on the shoulder heading east stopped, doors open. 1 pickup heading west, moving fast. I caught it in my mirrors for 5 seconds, and then it was gone around a curve. I didn't know if the driver was alive or what alive meant now, in terms of the information I was collecting. I needed food. I was down to 2 granola bars and 4 liters of water in the cab. A problem I'd need to solve in the 4-minute window. Exterior vending machines, drive-thrus if any were running, convenience stores where I could be in and out without lingering. I started mapping this against what I knew about the next 50 miles of I-80. I noticed something as I was mapping it. I'd been timing my stops for hours without making a decision to do so. Somewhere between Wells and Salt Lake, I'd started counting the minutes outside the cab. I hadn't chosen the number 4. It had arrived and felt right, the way a correct fuel load for a given route feels right. Not reasoned, just accurate. I accepted it as information from a part of me that was running calculations I wasn't fully conscious of yet. A herd of cattle in a field off the highway, 200 yards from the fence line. Maybe 100 animals. Moving, not grazing, moving, with direction drifting northeast across the field in a slow, coherent drift, the way a herd moves when something has communicated something to them. I slowed and watched through the passenger window until the truck's movement took them out of my sightline. I thought, they're moving. I let that sit without completing it. I drove. Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Defense. The biological event affecting the continental United States is of unknown origin. All citizens shelter in place. Do not approach stationary individuals. Do not approach abandoned vehicles or structures. Military assets are deployed and operational. Further updates will be issued. Shelter in place. Do not approach stationary individuals. I read this 4 times. Not sick individuals, not affected individuals. Stationary. I needed fuel. I pulled into a Flying J truck stop outside Salt Lake City. I'd looped back slightly, looking for a stop I knew was accessible and quick. Lights on across the whole facility, the restaurant, the store, the shower facilities. Pumps running. I pulled to the truck pumps and got out and started fueling. I looked at the main building. Through the restaurant window, I could see it was occupied. People at the tables. A man at the counter with a newspaper open in front of him. A server standing at the end of the counter with one hand on the coffee machine. Nobody was moving. I fueled in 4 minutes. I got back in the cab. I drove without going inside. I pulled back onto the on-ramp and understood, only as I did it, that I'd been timing myself without deciding to. Somewhere between Wells and this Flying J, I'd started counting the minutes outside the cab. I didn't know when I'd started, or what the number 4 meant to whatever part of me had chosen it. I drove east on I-80 into the Wyoming evening. I drove until the sky had finished going dark and the stars over Wyoming came out, the dense mass that only appears when there's no electric light for 50 miles in any direction. I pulled to the shoulder east of Laramie, not a rest stop, not a structure, just the shoulder and the gravel and the fence line of whoever's land ran alongside the road. I left the engine running. I reclined the seat. I slept 3 hours. When I woke, it was almost midnight and the stars were unchanged. I lay there looking at them through the windshield for a few minutes. Whatever was happening at ground level. The sky was going to stay the sky for a while. I sat up, checked fuel, checked the phone. Emergency broadcast system. This is a national emergency. All federal agencies coordinating response to biological crisis of unknown origin, now affecting all continental states. Military assets operational. Citizens, remain sheltered. Do not approach military personnel or equipment. Updates to follow. All continental states. I thought about El Paso. I thought about my mother in the house on the east side. The house with the kitchen where the radio had sat, in the same spot for 30 years. I tried a phone, straight to voicemail, not ringing, straight through, which meant the phone was off or the network was down. I thought about the word stationary and what it implied about the east side of El Paso, and then I stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it had no operational value right now, and operational value was the metric I was using. I started the truck. I drove. I want to tell you something about the recorder, about why I started using it. I found it 8 months ago in an office supply store in Pueblo. One of those small digital recorders, battery-powered, the kind used for meeting notes. It had 2 AAA batteries that still had charge, which I took as information about how long it had been sitting there. I held it for a while before I took it. I hadn't spoken to another person in almost 3 years at that point, and I wasn't sure speaking out loud was something I could still do with any reliability. It is. The recorder helps, not because I think anyone will hear these transmissions. I don't transmit them anywhere. The word is just what feels right for what I do. I read the alerts. I record what I remember about them. I put the record somewhere outside my own head where it exists independently of me. There's a practical reason, and there's another reason I don't examine too closely. The practical reason, if I stop, if the truck breaks down somewhere I can't reach a fuel source, if something happens, the recorder will be there. The record will be there. Someone will know what I know, in the order I came to know it. The other reason is that talking keeps me here. Moving keeps me alive. Talking keeps me here. Those are different things, and I need both. I say into the recorder, there were 47 more alerts after that one. The language got shorter each time. The last one was 11 words. I've counted them many times. I'll give them to you in order. But first I want to tell you about the second day, because the second day is when I started to understand what I was doing and why I was still alive. Or started to understand it, which isn't the same as understanding it. I want to be clear about that distinction because I made the mistake of conflating them for a while and it cost me something I can't fully account for. Second day. I drove through Wyoming on the second morning. I'd pulled off the shoulder east of Laramie after 3 hours of sleep, checked the mirrors, checked the road, pulled back onto I-80 heading east. The sky was still dark. The stars going out one section at a time as the light behind me started building. I drove through Cheyenne at dawn. I'd known Cheyenne from 30-odd passes over 22 years, the way the city appeared from the west on the interstate, organized and grid-based, a city that had planned itself with confidence. Today the lights were on. Today the lights being on told me nothing I didn't already know. I took one exit, drove 2 blocks into a residential neighborhood, stopped the truck. I got out. I stood on the sidewalk for 90 seconds. I counted. The street was raw and quiet, houses intact, cars in driveways, a sprinkler running in 1 yard on its timer cycle, indifferent to what had changed, doing what the timer said to do. A bicycle on the sidewalk. A child's shoe in the middle of the street, one shoe. Nothing around it to explain the one. I was testing something. I still couldn't have said precisely what, but I stood in a fixed location in a residential neighborhood in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and waited to see what happened to me in 90 seconds. Nothing happened. I got back in the truck. I set the result next to the others and drove east into Nebraska. Nebraska flattened everything. The landscape committed to its own flatness, with a conviction that Wyoming and Utah only gestured at. The plains opened up east of Cheyenne and just kept going, the horizon so far away it felt like a theory about where the land ended, the sky above so large the truck felt like a moving piece of punctuation in a sentence that went on indefinitely. I'd driven Nebraska maybe 40 times. I knew its moods. Today it was clear and still and empty and looked exactly like itself. I saw another cattle herd in a field outside Ogallala, moving northeast, same direction as the herd in Wyoming, the same coherent drift. I watched them as long as I could see them. I thought about the dog in Wendover. I thought about the military convoy I'd passed heading west the day before. 12 vehicles, fast, all moving. I thought about the man on the CB radio somewhere east of Grand Island, a trucker, describing what he'd seen at a truck stop in Iowa, voice working hard to stay level. 11 minutes, and then mid-sentence the signal cut. I thought, everybody I've seen alive is moving. I let that sentence sit for 50 miles before I added the other half. I thought, everybody I've seen who isn't moving is... I drove. I had a small spiral notebook in the door pocket, load notes, dispatch times, calculations that were easier on paper. I'd started writing in it sometime that morning without deciding to. Under a column I labeled moving, myself, military convoy, 12 vehicles heading west, day 1, cattle times 2, Wyoming and Nebraska, dog in Wendover, CB trucker in Iowa, signal cut mid-sentence. Under a column I labeled not moving, rest area, wells, 3 vehicles, 1 engine running, gas station, Pequop, interior. Diner, Wendover, full, server, mid-step. Interchange, Salt Lake City, 3 vehicles, doors open. Residential neighborhood, Cheyenne, sprinkler on timer. And then Flying J, restaurant full, man with newspaper. I looked at these 2 columns for a long time while the road ran under me. I thought, this is a hypothesis, not a conclusion. I thought, I need more data before I say it out loud. I thought, I've had enough data since the diner, and I've been waiting to let myself see it, because once I see it, I have to think about what it means. Thinking about what it means includes thinking about El Paso and my mother and Elena and everyone I know who was in a fixed location when the first alert came through at 3:47 in the morning. And I'm not ready to think about that yet. I drove. FEMA, Department of Defense, biological event nationwide. All states affected. All citizens shelter in place, do not travel by any means. Avoid all abandoned structures and vehicles. Military operations ongoing. Do not approach military personnel. Do not travel. Remain sheltered. I tried my mother one more time. I left a longer voicemail in Spanish because Spanish was what I used when I needed someone to actually hear me and not just process the words. Mamá, soy yo. Escúchame. No te quedes en la casa. Necesitas estar moviéndote. Sale, camina, al menos. Camina hacia algún lado. No sé si esto te está alegando. No sé si el correo de voz todavía funciona. Pero si lo recibes, muévete. No te quedes. Eso es lo que creo. Puedo estar equivocado. Pero muévete. I hung up. I knew she hadn't gotten it. I knew it the way you know certain things before you have evidence. I drove. I stopped twice that day for fuel. Once I found an exterior vending machine at a rest area in Nebraska that still had power. 3 granola bars and a bottle of water. 4 minutes total. Back in the cab and moving before the 4 minutes were up. I was keeping track of everything now. Times, locations, what I observed, how long I was outside the cab at each stop. Not because I had a plan for the information. Because a man who kept records felt better keeping records, and feeling better had operational value even when I couldn't explain why. I found a CB signal outside Grand Island. A trucker east of me, somewhere in Iowa, confused and scared, describing what he'd seen at a truck stop. I listened for 11 minutes. Then mid-sentence, the signal cut. I tried the CB channel for an hour. Nothing. I drove into the second afternoon. FEMA, CDC, Department of Defense, biological event, causative agent under investigation. Transmission vector, unknown. Exposure risk, highest in densely populated fixed locations. Rural exposure, partial. Risk associated with movement through affected areas, unknown. All citizens, shelter in place. Await official guidance before attempting movement. Updates to follow. Risk associated with movement, unknown. I read it 5 times. Each time I landed on the same word in the same place. Unknown. They didn't know. They were telling everyone to stay still, and they didn't know if staying still was the thing that was getting people. I'd been moving for 38 hours. I felt functional. I felt tired and hungry in the ways you managed. I felt present. Densely populated fixed locations. That was the phrase, fixed. The diner in Wendover was a fixed location. The Flying J was a fixed location. My truck was not fixed, had not been fixed, not for 22 years. I looked at my 2 columns in the notebook. I thought the hypothesis is correct. I thought, I'm going to say it out loud so I can hear it and decide if it's true when I hear it. I said it out loud into the cab to nobody. Staying still is what gets you. Moving is what keeps you alive. I sat with it. It sounded true. It felt true the way accurate arithmetic feels true. Not emotional, not hopeful, just accurate. I filed it as a conclusion rather than a hypothesis, and I kept driving, and I didn't think about what that conclusion implied about everyone I knew who had been in a fixed location at 3:47 in the morning on July 14th. I drove into the second evening. I drove into the second night. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, alone on I-80 in western Nebraska with the road completely mine and the dark completely mine, and the dark completely mine, and nothing outside the windshield except the headlights and what they showed me, I let myself think about the window. I've been not thinking about it for 36 hours. I'd touched the edges, the delivery that didn't happen, the hospital on the evacuation list, but not the center of it, not the call with Greer. Greer was my overnight dispatcher, 6 years working with him, competent and stubborn in equal measure, which made him someone I managed rather than someone I talked to. I'd been flagging a routing problem for 3 weeks, an inefficiency in how he was sequencing the Nevada-Utah corridor that was costing time on every run. The math was clear. It worked out my way. He knew it, and wouldn't say so, and I'd needed him to say so, and we'd been on the phone about it at 10:15 at night on July 13th, and still on the phone at 10:47 when the window closed. I'd been right. I'm still certain of this. Not defensively certain, not emotionally certain, accurately certain, the same way I'm certain about road grades and load limits. The math worked out my way. It still does. Nothing that has happened in 4 years has made the math work out any other way. I thought I won an argument and it saved my life. I thought. I don't know why I couldn't finish the thought that night. I know what the thought was. I've finished it 100 times since, in the cab at 3 in the morning with the recorder running, or not running. I know what it costs to be right about something. I know the math of it the same way I knew the routing math, clearly, completely, without sentiment. The math of the window is this. I was right about a quarter inefficiency that cost the company 4 hours a week. I held that position for 22 minutes on the phone. Those 22 minutes put me 3 hours behind schedule. Those 3 hours put me 300 miles from a hospital in Reno at 1 in the morning on July 14th. Being 300 miles from that hospital at 1 in the morning on July 14th is the reason I'm alive. That's the math. It runs the same way every time. What I couldn't finish thinking at 2 in the morning in western Nebraska was the sentence that comes after the math. The sentence about what the math means. I still have trouble finishing it 4 years later into this recorder on a county road in Colorado with nothing outside the windows except dark. I don't think it's fear. I think it's that some sentences, once you say them out loud, change the shape of what you're living inside. And the shape of what I was living inside, 2 days in, alone on I-80, with my hypothesis confirmed and my mother's phone going straight to voicemail, was something I needed to stay functional inside of. So I drove. The road was mine and the dark was mine, and I drove through it and let the unfinished thought go back to wherever unfinished thoughts go. FEMA, this is an emergency alert. Biological event, status critical. Government continuity protocols now activated. All citizens remain sheltered. Military operations ongoing. Further updates pending. Government continuity protocols. I translated. Someone decided who was worth moving and moved them. The people worth moving were being kept alive through the same thing, keeping me alive, except they'd figured it out faster, or had better information, or both. Either way, they were moving. The people in the diner in Wendover were not. This was the last alert for 16 hours. I noted the gap. Gaps in official communication were their own kind of data. I drove into the third day. Wyoming again. I'd looped west looking for a fuel stop, corrected, came back east on 80. Nebraska. Iowa at dawn. The sky going from black to blue to the pale gold of a clear morning over flat farmland. I'd driven Iowa maybe 20 times. It looked the same. The sky was unchanged. Whatever had happened at ground level, and the sky was going to stay the sky indefinitely, and I'd stop being surprised by this. I was running on minimal sleep and low food, and that far gone kind of tired I knew from experience. I'd done 40-hour stretches twice in my career, back when deadlines were the emergencies I had to manage. I knew how to operate in this state. I trusted my hands even when my brain was running behind. I stopped for fuel at a station in western Iowa where the pumps were running on what must have been generator power. 4 minutes. Found a vending machine around the side, granola bars, a candy bar, a bottle of Gatorade. 3 minutes. I ate the candy bar before I got back in the cab. I drove east. I was on I-80 somewhere between the Wyoming border and the Platte River when the sky started going light ahead of me. Early dawn, the gray pink of a clear morning in the Great Plains, the horizon so flat you could see the color change spreading from the east like something being slowly turned on. I'd been alone on the road for 60 hours. I want to say something about what 60 hours alone on a highway does to the arithmetic. The arithmetic doesn't change. The numbers are the numbers. The columns say what they say, but the weight of it changes. At hour 10, you're a man with a hypothesis. At hour 30, you're a man with a conclusion. At hour 60, you're a man with a conclusion that nobody else is alive to verify, and that's a different thing entirely. You start to wonder if the conclusion is real or if it's what your brain assembled to give you something to hold on to. You start to wonder if the arithmetic would survive contact with another person or if it would dissolve the moment someone looked at it from the outside. I'd been wondering this since somewhere around hour 40. I'd been driving anyway because driving was the conclusion, and you don't abandon a conclusion just because you're alone with it. I crested a rise, the land too flat for real hills, more of a long swell in the terrain that you don't notice until you're on top of it, and suddenly you can see further. Headlights. Coming toward me. 2 headlights, halogen yellow, moving at highway speed. A vehicle, moving. I braked. Controlled, not panic, just the deliberate deceleration of a man who has been making deliberate decisions for 60 hours. I pulled to the right shoulder and stopped. Put my hazards on. The headlights kept coming. They got closer, then they slowed. They crossed the median, the grass median of this stretch, easy to cross if you did it carefully, and pulled to the shoulder on my side. 200 yards ahead of me, facing my headlights with their headlights. They stopped. I sat in the cab with the engine running and the hazards going and looked at the other vehicle. I couldn't make it out through the headlight glare. A moving vehicle now stopped 200 yards away facing me. It didn't move. I didn't move. I want to be clear about what 60 hours alone does. It's not loneliness. Loneliness is a feeling, and I wasn't having feelings in the normal way by hour 60. Feelings had become something that happened when there was bandwidth for them, and there wasn't bandwidth. It's more like the world has been reducing itself to the size of the cab, slowly. And at some point, you start to believe on some level you can't argue yourself out of that the cab is all there is. That what's outside the glass is information, not reality. That you are the only moving thing. And then, headlights. I sat there for 4 minutes. I counted. Same 4 minutes I'd given every stop since Wells. Same 4 minutes I'd given the diner and the rest area and the Flying J in the neighborhood in Cheyenne. 4 minutes in which the other vehicle sat still on the shoulder of I-80 in western Nebraska, and I sat still in my cab, and we looked at each other across 200 yards of empty highway in the gray before dawn. Then I made a decision. I'll tell you what I decided in the next transmission.